Hello everyone, Dark of All Trades here. Now I see a lot of religy boys trying to use science to prove their god. This can be very persuasive for some people, because if the science points to one conclusion, then it can be difficult to argue against it effectively. That being said, I'm not a scientist. I do understand a lot of the basics about a lot of topics though. It's fascinating to think how far we've come, especially with things we used to think were impossible, like being able to correct vision with lasers or rebuilding damaged tissues in new ways. And one of my goals for my day job and for this channel is to explain things that I understand to all of you in a way that all of you understand. But as I go about my day though, I'm also reminded of how much we still don't know. For instance, maybe it's when I trip over something I didn't see coming or forget where I left my keys. Little reminders that our brains and bodies are still full of mysteries. And even with all of our progress, there are still limits to what we understand or can accomplish, though that's never stopped science from pushing those boundaries. That all being said, today I'm going to look at a channel called God's the Answer. Note, there's no apostrophe, so it's gods, plural. It's like King's the Warriors, or Stevie's the Wonder, or Maximum the Hormone. Anyway, enough English nerding, Dark. Back to the video. Anyway, I stumbled across their video, Atheists Can't Explain This, ... A bit of a clickbaity title, but it worked on me. I wanted to know what gods, plural, the answer, thinks atheists can't explain. I'm gonna guess that the video, to put it lightly, is skeptical of what atheists can and can't do, especially when it comes to complex things. So let's dive in and see what GTA has in store for us today.
Only heaven silent for an answer. When these geniuses of scientists come out and have a big mouth about trying to prove there is no God.
Okay, I have to stop him right here. It may not look like it at first glance, but he's making a pretty big claim in just this first part of his first sentence. Let's look at it very carefully, because it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about science that's worth exploring. First, this isn't actually what scientists do. They aren't trying to prove there is no God. I don't know any scientist that is even attempting to do that. That's not how science works, and it's important to understand why. Science operates on what we call methodological naturalism. This is just a fancy way of saying it studies things that we can observe, measure, and test. Think of it like being a detective, cold case or otherwise. A detective doesn't prove that a crime didn't happen. They can only collect evidence about what did happen. Similarly, science doesn't set forth to prove the non-existence of anything, whether that's gods, unicorns, or invisible dragons. Here's a simple example. Some of you may know this as the basic idea of Sagan's dragon. If I told you that there was an invisible, intangible dragon in my garage that leaves no physical evidence whatsoever, you couldn't prove it doesn't exist. But more importantly, you wouldn't need to. The burden of proof would be on me to demonstrate that it does exist. This is what we call the burden of proof principle, and it's crucial to both science and rational thinking. What's particularly interesting is that many scientists are actually religious themselves. Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project, is a devout Christian. Georges Lemaitre, who first proposed the Big Bang Theory, was a Catholic priest. These scientists don't see their work as trying to disprove God. They're simply trying to understand how the natural world works. When scientists do engage with religious claims, it's typically because those claims make testable predictions about the natural world. For instance, if someone claims that prayer can heal broken bones instantly, we can test that. If someone claims the Earth is 6,000 years old, we can examine geological evidence. If someone claims that humans never evolved from earlier species, we can study things like the fossil record. But the existence of a God itself, that is outside the scope of scientific inquiry, what philosophers call unfalsifiable. It's not that scientists are avoiding the question, it's that the tools of science simply aren't equipped to answer it. Just like a metal detector can't tell you if someone is in love. So when he suggests that scientists are trying to prove there is no God, they're attacking a position that most scientists don't actually hold. It's what we call a straw man argument, intentionally misrepresenting someone's position to make it easier to attack. A half sentence in and we're already off to a rocky start. Here's hoping it gets better.
With all the advancement in the medical field, they have no idea what this brain all about. They can't even do a successful full eye transplant. With all the advancement, with all the technology, A full eye transplant where you can see with it, they cannot, because they say the optic nerve has 1 million nerves inside of it, and we need to connect all those 1 million nerves to the eye for it to see.
This argument is actually fascinating because it falls into the trap that religious apologists always fall into. It actually proves the opposite of what he intends. Yes, it's true, we can't currently do full eye transplants that restore vision. Though fairly recently, so I'm going to guess before this guy gave this talk, there was a successful full eye transplant, the one in May of 2023. Though the ending part he slips in is still accurate. We don't know if he will ever see out of that eye, but biologically, things seem to be going well. According to an article from NYU, quote, although the transplanted eye has not regained vision, electroretinography, a test that measures the retina's electrical response to light, shows a photoreceptor response, indicating that rods and cones, the light-sensitive nerve cells in the eye, survive the transplant. I'll leave a source for this in the description. So it's not perfect yet, but we have done the transplant, and we're heading in the right direction. However, when responding to someone, I think the honest thing to do is to give credit when that person you're responding to is correct. So yes, he is technically correct. He's also correct about the optic nerve's complexity too. It contains approximately 1 million nerve fibers that need to connect with incredible precision to function. But here's where the logic takes a wrong turn, and I'll explain why. He's suggesting that our inability to replicate the system somehow proves divine design. His argument can be simplified to: Premise 1, X thing happens to exist. Premise 2, humans can't do X thing. Conclusion, therefore a God must exist to do X thing. This is known as a God of the Gap style argument, and it is precisely what's happening in the eye transplant argument, and it is problematic for several reasons. Historical precedent shows why this is faulty. In 1600, humans can't explain lightning, therefore God does it. In 1800, humans can't explain disease, therefore God causes it. And in 1900, humans can't explain heredity, therefore God designs each creature. Time and time again, these gaps get filled by scientific understanding. But the logic itself is fallacious for a number of reasons as well. It assumes only two possibilities, human ability or God. It ignores natural processes as a potential explanation. It suggests that human inability to replicate something means it couldn't arise naturally. And the conclusion doesn't logically follow from the premises. If we apply this logic consistently, we would have to conclude that God directly creates everything humans can't yet replicate, which would include things like perfect spider silk, photosynthesis, many animal abilities like echolocation, electric sense, etc., and natural antibiotics. This type of argument fundamentally mistakes "we can't do this yet" for "this is impossible without supernatural intervention." Imagine you're looking at a modern smartphone. It is incredibly complex, billions of transistors, intricate circuits, sophisticated software. Now imagine showing this to someone from the year 1700. They couldn't replicate it, understand it, or even begin to comprehend how it works. Would their inability to recreate it prove the phone was created by supernatural means? Of course not. It would only prove that technology and understanding take time to develop. The same principle applies to our understanding of the eye. We know exactly why we can't do full transplants yet. Each nerve fiber is microscopically thin, about 1 micron in diameter, or 1/100th the width of a human hair. They need to connect in precisely the right order, and our current surgical techniques aren't fine enough to accomplish this. But we're making progress. We can already do partial corneal transplants, artificial lens replacements, and even retinal implants that restore some vision to blind patients. Though what's particularly fascinating is how the eye's complexity actually provides compelling evidence for evolution, not design. We can trace its development through evolutionary history, from simple light-sensitive patches in ancient organisms to the complex organs we have today. So for instance, flatworms have simple eye spots that only detect light and me. Nautiluses have pinhole eyes with no lens. Fish have simple lens eyes. Mammals have more complex eyes with color vision. Some birds have even more sophisticated eyes that can see ultraviolet light. Each step represents a small, useful improvement that could evolve naturally. We've even identified many of the genes involved in eye development, like PAC6, which is shared across species from fruit flies to humans. On top of everything I just listed, his argument falls into what we call an argument from incredulity fallacy, essentially saying, "I can't imagine how this could happen naturally, therefore it must be supernatural." But our inability to fully replicate something doesn't mean it couldn't have evolved here naturally over millions of years. After all, we can't even create synthetic spider silk that's as good as the real thing either, but we understand how spiders make it through natural processes. But the most fatal flaw I see in this idea is glaring when I do my favorite method to break these down. I hinted pretty hard at this before, but here I'm going to grant his argument. Humans cannot do full eye transplant where vision is restored. Of course, we have no evidence of a god doing a full eye transplant where vision is restored either, but let's just ignore that for now. You got it. We currently can't. But what happens when humans eventually do a full eye transplant that restores visions? What happens to his argument? Will he give up on his god? I press X to doubt. Arguments for intelligent design often shift when new evidence disproves their initial claims, a tactic known as moving the goalposts. Typically, the argument begins with, humans can't do this, so it must require a god or higher intelligence. However, once humans demonstrate the ability to accomplish that very thing, the argument changes to, this just proves an intelligence is needed, and since humans couldn't do it before, an intelligent designer must have originally been responsible. This shift reinterprets human achievements as confirmation of design, and failing to consider natural processes or technological progress as explanations.
Well, it's the brain that sees, but the eye allows the light to come in for the brain, and the optic nerve processes that light into the brain to say, please send a vision.
Interestingly, this is one of the more accurate statements in the video, though it is being used to draw incorrect conclusions. Here he's grasped the basic concept of how human vision works. But let's explore why this actually supports our scientific understanding rather than undermining it. Vision is indeed a process where the brain does the seeing, but what's remarkable is just how well we understand this process. Let me break it down a way and it shows both its complexity and our comprehension. First, light enters to the eye through the cornea and lens, which focus it onto the retina, a layer of tissue about as thick as a piece of tissue paper. In the retina, specialized cells called photoreceptors, which are rods and cones, convert the light into electrical signals. We have about 120 million rods for night vision and 6 million cones for color vision. Each one of these cells is more sophisticated than our best digital cameras, yet we understand exactly how they work. Think of it like this. Imagine a digital camera connected to a supercomputer. The camera, eye, captures light, converts it to data, electrical signals, sends it through a cable, optic nerve, and then the computer, brain, processes that data into an image we can understand. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Your brain isn't just passively receiving this information, it's actively constructing your visual experience. Here's what I mean. Your eyes actually see everything upside down, but your brain flips the image. There's a blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve connects. Your brain fills in that gap. Your brain is constantly making predictions about what you're seeing and updating them in real time. Color, motion, depth, and form are all processed in different areas of your brain simultaneously. What's particularly compelling is how this system shows a clear sign of evolutionary development. I touched on this before, but I need to go over it again. We can trace the development of vision across species. Euglena, single-celled organisms, have eye spots that just detect light direction. Planaria, flatworms, have simple cup-shaped eyes that can detect light intensity. Nautiluses have pinhole eyes with no lens. Squids have eyes remarkably similar to ours, but with some key differences. Birds have additional oil droplets in their cones that allow them to see ultraviolet light. And again, we've identified the genes involved in eye development. A gene called PAX6 is so fundamental to eye development that it is shared across species from fruit flies to humans. It's a clear fingerprint of our common evolutionary heritage. The fact that we understand this process so thoroughly actually contradicts his larger point. Yes, the system is incredibly complex, but we mapped it, studied it, and even begun to replicate aspects of it with artificial retinas and brain-computer interfaces. Our understanding isn't limiting our belief in a divine creator. It's expanding our appreciation for the power of natural processes.
They haven't reached not even 10% of how the brain functions. And if any damage happens to the brain, there is no power on earth that can fix that.
This statement makes two distinct claims that we need to examine separately because each reveals something interesting about both our current understanding of the brain and common misconceptions about science. Let's start with the 10% understanding claim. This might be related to the old myth that we only use 10% of our brains, which is completely false. In reality, we use virtually all of our brain, and our understanding of it is far more extensive than here he suggests. Let me explain some of what we do know. We've mapped the brain's major regions and their functions with incredible precision. We know which parts control movement, process vision, store memories, regulate emotions, and more. We understand how neurons communicate using electrical and chemical signals right down to the molecular level. We've identified dozens of neurotransmitters and their roles. We can observe brain activity in real time using technologies like fMRI, EEG, and PET scans. We've even developed brain-computer interfaces that allow paralyzed individuals to control computers with their thoughts. What we don't fully understand yet is how all these systems work together to create consciousness and complex thoughts. It's like knowing all the parts of a symphony orchestra and how each instrument works, but still being amazed on how they combine and create striking symphonies that elicit all sorts of emotions. Now let me address the second claim about brain damage being unfixable. This is demonstrably incorrect, and we have countless examples proving otherwise. Let me start with neuroplasticity. The brain has a remarkable ability to rewire itself. Stroke victims can often regain speech and movement through therapy. People who lose sight develop enhanced hearing and touch processing. Children who have half their brain removed can develop nearly normal function. So how about medical interventions? We can surgically remove brain tumors. We can stop epileptic seizures with targeted treatments. We can reduce Parkinson's symptoms with deep brain stimulation. We can even treat depression with targeted magnetic stimulation. Not enough? How about technological advances? Neural implants can restore some vision to the blind. Brain-computer interfaces help paralyzed individuals communicate. Cognitive rehabilitation techniques help recovery from traumatic brain injuries. What's particularly interesting is how these discoveries came about through scientific investigation, the very process he seems to be dismissing. We didn't achieve these breakthroughs by assuming things were impossible or supernatural. We achieved them through careful study, experimentation, and persistence. Think of it this way. In 1900, many of these treatments would have seemed impossible. If we had accepted the idea that no power on Earth can fix brain problems, we would never have developed these solutions. This perfectly illustrates why the argument from complexity or argument from current limitations is flawed. Our inability to do something today doesn't mean it's impossible or requires supernatural explanation. And that's the end of his video. So what are the actual points he made here today? What is this that atheists can't explain? There are scientists who are trying to prove there is no God. Scientists can't even do a successful full eye transplant with all the advancement, with all the technology. The optic nerve has 1 million nerves inside of it, and we need to connect all those 1 million nerves to the eye for it to see. It's the brain that sees, but the eye allows a light to come into the brain, and the optic nerve processes that light so the brain can make sense of it. Scientists have reached an understanding of 10% of how the brain functions, and if any damage happens to the brain, they can't fix that. What strikes me about these claims is how they all center around one core idea, that scientific limitations somehow disprove scientific understanding itself. Whether discussing the eye's complexity, the brain's functions, or healing capabilities, the argument consistently points to current technical limitations as evidence against scientific explanation.
If that's where you're going to put your God in this world, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance.
That's it for this one. So I've given my perspective on each of these points throughout this video, but now I'm curious about yours. What do you think? Do you find Grand Theft Audience's video convincing? Or are you like me and think a gap in the guy's knowledge doesn't mean he can just shove his God in as an explanation? Have you encountered similar arguments before? Let me know in the comments below. I'm particularly interested in hearing your experiences with these kinds of discussions and how you approach them. Overall, I give this video a 7 facepalming Mr. Jesuses out of 10. He does a fair job making his points easy to understand, but he oversimplifies complex topics, presents unsupported claims, and doesn't engage with any counter-arguments, actual or potential. While it is understandable for a general audience, it lacks the depth and critical thinking necessary for any kind of academic or intellectual standard. Now, if you appreciated this naturally methodological breakdown, methodically hit the like button. Though, if you want to decrease the gap in your knowledge, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to get a new lesson every week. Speaking of methodically improving, I need to give thanks to the super thanks. A regular, Carl Bart 1, who just says, thanks. No, thank you, Carl Bart 1. Your continued support helps assure me that I'm at least doing something right. Though speaking of doing something right, I need to give an extra right thanks to my patrons. Calamitous Anima, Sora, Long-Haired Lefty, Musical Ocelot, Ooga Booga Luga, Anonymous Netizen, Angel, Tarek Alkasab, Jamabom, Kai Henningsen, and Triple Towel, who are the electro-retinographic test that shows the world that my channel is indeed visible. If you'd like to be one of eventual millions of optic fibers that make up my channel, you can join them for as low as a single $1 a month at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. I appreciate all of you here, even if we disagree. Whether that's in the live chat during the premiere, sharing the show on your medias of social, or just giving a like and commenting. It all helps to get new eyes on my channel, and that leads to growth and eventually more opportunities to do more talks. I would love to go to a convention and give a short talk on some of this stuff. I love talking to people and helping others, and while I don't have a lot of means to do much more than I am now, I am definitely doing what I can, and I have all of you to thank for helping encourage me to do so. Thank you. And as always, keep learning.
So that's why